Hello, and a huge warm welcome to my guest, Samantha Dholakia, who I'm here with today to chat all things parenting, schools, and the behaviour balance system. But before we head into that, I just want to tell you a little more about our guest. Samantha is an international trainer and specialist in behaviour and emotional regulation with nearly 20 years of experience in education and childcare. She works closely with teachers and parents, supporting positive behaviour management and emotional well-being in children. As the creator of the Behaviour Balance System and the Behaviour Bank, Samantha has developed a holistic, inclusive, and research-backed approach that connects homes with education and childcare settings. Founder of SPD Training and Consultancy, formerly SPD Tuition and Coaching, Samantha is committed to driving innovation in education. Her holistic support model bridges the gap between homes and learning environments, offering a unified and comprehensive approach to behaviour management. Through her science-led methodology and the Behaviour Bank, something she believes is the only online portal of its kind, she provides holistic support to parents, educators and practitioners, promoting inclusive, collaborative and informed practices. SPD equips practitioners, carers and families with the tools to foster positive behaviours and emotional well-being in children. Focused on transforming behaviour management, the organisation works to improve outcomes across all stages of development, beginning with the early years foundation stage. I can't wait to hear more about this fab work. So let's just dive straight in. A huge welcome to Sam. How are you today?
There's quite a lot in there, right? Thank you so much for having me, Lucy.
Not at all. Your work, it just sounds absolutely fascinating, and there are so many things that you are doing, and from one person to another who loves a busy lifestyle and loves just throwing yourself into a million and one things, I can totally identify with your mission and everything that you're doing. It sounds incredible. So I can't wait to hear more. I can't wait to hear more about it. But first and foremost, you are a mum. What was your journey into parenthood like?
Tough.
Yeah.
Tough one. So as you said, I've been in education for quite some time. So I was a teacher and worked in childcare settings of nearly 20 years now. But my journey into parent life was not an easy one. My husband and I went through the IVF process in the end. So we were very blessed to have our son, and very grateful. But it was not an easy one. And when he finally arrived, after all of the preparation and the challenge that we had, no one really gets it until you get given your child and you're leaving the hospital and you get home and you think, now what do I do with this little human? Yeah, that's it. And I always kind of think it's the biggest imposter syndrome that you get, right? Is you get home and you're like, they let me leave with this small human. What?
Just they know I've got this baby.
Home with me? Yeah. So it's funny, isn't it? Having done all of this work for all of these years, working with all ages and stages of children, when you have your own, it still hits you pretty hard. And it was very interesting. And yes, my parent life is probably very much like my professional life. It's very full, and very considered, and very kind of, I always say to my friends and my family that I do try everything on my son first. So he's either really lucky or really unfortunate. We'll see. The proof will be in the pudding. But we do lots of stuff with him, to support him and to work, with his emotions and his behaviors and to unpick it with him and all of this jazz. But yes, so I very much parent through science, much to, I'm sure, my husband's irritation. But he gives it a go with me and we do it together. So, it's one of those rocks and hard places, parent life, isn't it? Because you want to do all of the things, but you're also human, which is a tough gig.
We have to remember that sometimes, don't we?
Goodness, yes, we all get it wrong. It's just how we kind of get back on track that counts, right?
Yeah, and people, I speak to so many parents and people always say the same thing, like, we're not given a handbook. You're given the baby and then it's like, right, learn on your feet. learn as you go, which is amazing at the same time, because it gives you that confidence. Like when you look back and you go, yeah, I did that, we got through it, we found our way of working, it's amazing. But sometimes in those moments, I tell people this story. I remember the first night I came home with my daughter, and before I had her, I was very much that parent that was like, right, I'm going to breastfeed. I'm not going to have any dummies. I'm going to only give her like home cooked food, all of that, and kind of naively thinking all of that. And then we got home and she wouldn't latch on. I couldn't feed her. When I was at the hospital, whenever I struggled with latching her on, rather than show me how to breastfeed, they just put her on for me. So when I got home, I couldn't, for love nor money, get her to latch on. And she was screaming and I was crying, and her dad was on the end of the bed, head in hands, going, what have we done? It was like, I don't know what to do. It was one of the most stressful times of my life. And I remember ringing the hospital and they were like, you're going to have to come back and we'll give you some pre-made formula until the shops open, because this was a Saturday night and the shops had closed, so there was no shops open to go and get formula. I had no bottles or anything. I was so unprepared. So he was driving back to the hospital at 2 a.m. to go and get these little pre-made formula bottles so that she could get some food, I could get some sleep, and then the next day we went and it was like bottles, dummies, formula, everything, because I was like, she needs food.
Yeah.
I'll have it all.
It's funny, I work with obviously, work with parents as well, and the amount of parents that go in with the birth plan, and by the get they're just like, give me anything you've got. Because nothing can prepare you for this. You step through the door, and in whatever way that comes, and it's so interesting when you talk to other parents. And I think we live in a society where we don't share as much as we once did. We don't rely on each other so much. We kind of live in much more of an isolation. And actually, it's so important to share not only the joy, because parenthood is full of that, but the toughness as well, because it is also full of that. And we don't talk about it enough. We don't talk about the 3 a.m. kind of crying, hysterical moments that you have as a parent, and the idea that actually there is no good or bad baby. I remember having these conversations very early on with other new mums of, oh no, my child's a really good sleeper, or a really good feeder, or a really good this. And obviously, with my background, bringing professional and personal head, I was thinking there is no good or bad of any of that. There's just a journey of your child making their way and you making your way. And I think we start these quote unquote behavior conversations from the get-go, actually, where we start talking about whether our child is good at something or bad at something. From the moment they're born, we're kind of like trying to decipher whether they're on track or not. And actually, as you said, things like breastfeeding is so much harder than people realize. Even having a baby is a lot harder than people realize. And we're told from a very young age how not to get pregnant. And we're not told the opposite of how to actually get pregnant. A successful way as you want it to happen. And it's really interesting because all of these conversations, I feel like they kind of they pave the way, don't they? And as our children grow and develop as parents, we have this idea of the things that they quote unquote should be doing or not be doing. And that starts from the very beginning. It starts from the fundamentals of they should be sleeping, or they should be eating, or they should be waking up to feed, or they should be, this and this. And you just think, gosh, our children from the very beginning have been shitted all over.
There's so much contradiction out there as well, isn't it? You've got one person saying you should be doing this, and then the other person saying, well, actually, no, you should be doing this. And that's one of the kind of reasons behind why I started Recap, and why I was on a mission to make information easy, accessible, jargon-free, but also backed by research, which, you know, was so happy to hear a lot of your work is backed by research, because it's so important to have that behind things, because we don't know things unless we try them, unless we pilot them, unless we test it, unless we see what works, what doesn't, and then we can go on and develop from there. So having that kind of constant conflict as a parent, especially if you're a first-time parent or a single parent or a young parent, you know, there are loads of variables that come into play that could make things more challenging for you to then have to navigate things. It's really difficult. So it's so important to have, you know, people like you out there that are able to cut through the confusion, the jargon, and say, look, we've tested it out, this is what we think, and this is how we go forward. I mean, so thinking about like school, what was your experience of school like? Do you think this has had any influence on why you do what you do now?
Yeah, massively. But before I launch into this, just to kind of hit back, you know, it's not even I feel that it's not the new mums, or it's every child is different. You can have 10 children and you might not be prepared for every single one of them, because every child is different. Every neurotype is different. Every relationship and bond you have with children is going to be different. The bonds they have with each other in your household is going to be different. And I always think, you know, and you're right, everything we do is completely science-led, research-backed, and we are constantly making sure it's most up-to-date as well, because as you said before, you know, a lot of the contradiction is based on outdated research, outdated methodologies and concepts that actually a lot of, you know, particularly in the behavior industry, was based on animal research rather than children. A long time ago. So, you know, actually it's everything is kind of constantly changing, and we only know what we know once we've learned it. And you know, I think it's so important to acknowledge that every relationship and child is different. So even if you're a parent thinking, well, I've got, you know, 5 children and I'm struggling with this one, you know, you're not alone there. It's because every child is different, and every your parenting is different with every child as a result of that. And it's not a moment or opportunity for guilt. Please park that. You know, we get enough of that as we leave the hospital with them. You know, they give you your baby and your bag of guilt ready for action. But you know, it's just about thinking, okay, well, that worked with that child, it might not work with the next one, or it might not even work with that child in the next phase and stage of development, because they love to move the goalposts, our kiddos, don't they?
Just to make our life difficult. Chooses to be a parent. This is hard
work. These little humans. But yes, school, it did massively shape and lead me into where I am, 100%. I actually have a huge love-hate relationship with school as a child.
Okay.
I experienced a huge amount of bullying as a child, and I was one of the only back then, one of the only families who had experienced divorce. So my parents had split, and I think I was the only or one of 2 families in my little school at the time where that had been the case. So not only did I get it from the kids, but also from the staff, and really? Had a lot of kind of, well, you know, low expectations, I should say, around what I could achieve as a result of this, you know, broken quote unquote home. So experienced a lot of that, and even, you know, I'm dyslexic and dyspraxic, and only found that out when I got to university. So spent a lot of my school days thinking that I just wasn't good enough and couldn't do it and couldn't learn and was a little bit dumb or slow, and you know, was always in an intervention for almost everything. I remember my mum saying once, it's quite funny, Lucy, she used to say to me, it's okay, you know, you're just not mathematically minded. And the irony of being dyslexic not, you know, was never lost on me, because I really struggled with that too. So finding maths difficult and being told that you're just, you know, you're more literacy minded was never easy to hear, because obviously found that very hard. Fast forward all those years, and I went into becoming a literacy consultant and supporting, you know, schools in raising in attainment in reading and writing. Again, the irony not being lost, but I think, you know, that definitely led me to that path of I wanted to be the teacher I wanted to have as a child, and I think we do that as parents too. You want to, you know, not to criticize and tell your parents they did a terrible job, but to be the aspects of your parents that you might have kind of wished they could be in different moments, or and I think there's nothing wrong with that, and it's really important to lean into those things, because actually that's how growth happens and development and change happens. But it certainly school wise did lead me to want to be a teacher and change the world, and that has never left me. As you can probably tell, I'm very passionate about making a difference in the world for our children and our grown-ups alike, and I think actually our own experiences are our best learnings.
Yes,
for sure.
Absolutely. And you hear it so often, like when you said that about you wanted to be the teacher that you needed, like that phrase, it's such a common feeling with a lot of people that work in this field, isn't it? Because and I was speaking to somebody, and I've spoken to a few people about this, and you think about your own schooling and you always remember specific teachers for whatever reason. There's always a teacher that sticks out in your mind, and I remember my teacher was Mrs. Johnson, her name was, in primary school, and I always talk about her. I have no idea where she is now. I'd love to see her again. And she was my year 4 year 5 teacher, and the support that she gave me, because I suffered really badly with anxiety as a child, especially in primary school. Hardly ever went to primary school, and whenever I did go in, it was the emotional support that she gave me that got me into school every day, or most days. So it wasn't the academic support, it wasn't any of that learning, it was that emotional support and relationship that I had with her that got me through the toughest times in primary school and got me in that door and actually attending. And I think that's really kind of fueled my drive of how important relationships are to me, whether that's kind of parent-child relationship, parent-teacher relationship, spousal relationship, sibling relationship. They're so important, the fundamentals of that. And that's really influenced me from school. So when you said about being the teacher that you needed, it really rings true, because I think so many people feel like that, and it does drive that passion, doesn't it?
It really does. It really does. And actually it's built the foundations for the behaviour balance system and the Behaviour Bank, because connection is relationships and connection is absolutely, it's the foundation for everything that we do, whether it's in the home or in a school or childcare setting. The relationships we have, I was talking to someone the other day, and we were talking about the fact that actually it's not what people talk to you about or tell you or teach you, it's what feeling they give you that you remember. And actually this is such a vital part that's so often overlooked or even just underestimated and undervalued in our homes and schools. And I had it the other day. So my child is now 5, and he is he's very confident, and he's very verbal about what he thinks. I don't know where that all comes from. No idea. All that hard work coming around and biting me in the butt, but he is very he's very vocal about his emotions. He's becoming very emotionally literate, which is of course what I'm working towards. But he also finds things very difficult because he's 5. And we were having a chat the other day, and it's really interesting listening to him and his perspective, because actually he will go from 0 to 1,000. And the other day he did something, I can't remember what he did. He spilt it. He took something off me because he had the hump. He took something, he grabbed it off me, the lid wasn't on properly, and he threw it on the floor. And it was my green juice. And my green juice went everywhere. And my immediate reaction was like, oh my goodness, because it was all over my new carpet, my new rug. And I just paused myself, which is one of the strategies that we really focus on. We call it the powerful pause. I paused myself and I thought, and I had to consciously remind myself, your relationship with your child is more important than your rug. let's leave the rug alone. We can come back to it. It won't stain, or if it's stained, it's already stained. And I just went, because he then darted up the stairs. And I just went upstairs and I knocked on the door, because he's now got to the point where he shuts the door because he wants to be alone. I know he's got 5 going on 15. I knocked on the door and I said, I'm coming in. And he said, no, want to be lonely. That's what he said to me. And I was like, no, you don't lonely, you want to be alone. He said, yes, that. And I went in and I sat next to him and I was like, I'm really sorry. And he looked at me really, puzzled. So, what are you sorry for? And I was like, I'm really sorry, because I felt angry in that moment. I felt angry because of my new rug. And I should, maybe think about my responses here. And I just said to him, I love you so much, but you were cross, and your actions kind of led to that. And I was cross, and my actions probably led to my face being particularly unhappy with you. And I'm really sorry about that. And he kind of just wiggled a little bit closer. And I just said, can you come and help me clear it up? And he said, no. And I said, okay. I was like, okay, I get that. I was like, when you're ready, do you think you want to come and help mummy? Because I'm going to go and clear it up, because I really don't want it staying on my rug. And he just looked at me and said, yeah. And I stood up, and as I stood up, he stood up. And I said, where are you going? He said, I'm going to come and help you clear it up. And I was like, thanks. And he was like, it's okay, we're a team. And I was like, we are a team. And I just kind of held his hand going down the stairs. We got down there, and he was getting all the tissue out, trying to clean it up. And I was thinking, oh gosh, don't use the tissue. Yeah. But we did it, and afterwards he gave me a big hug, and he was like, I'm really sorry, mummy. And I was like, I'm really sorry too. And that moment could have escalated. We could have had so much big behavior in that moment, because I was so annoyed. He was so annoyed. He was then kind of feeling rejected, which is one of the most damaging things for relationships, is rejection. And just having that conversation rather than clearing it up first really brought us together. And again, it's that power of relationships, isn't it? It's that power of communication, and just being like, as a parent in that moment, I messed up a little bit, because I was like, no, my goodness. And then I was like thinking, actually, he made a mistake. He didn't know the lid was not on properly. He didn't realize that that's what I was doing. He didn't deliberately ruin the rug. For everyone listening, just so you know, if you're worried about my rug, it's not damaged at all. It's fine. Everyone's thinking, what about the rug?
I was thinking I was going to be inundated with messages afterwards.
Poor rug. So the rug has survived. But and it just brought us so much closer together so quickly, having that conversation. And I just think back to my childhood and the things that I would potentially not have put in place in that moment if I didn't know the stuff I know. I probably would have just left him up there to cry it out by himself while angrily cleaning my rug, and actually that would have made things a million times worse in the long run for me, and for him. And I think that really kind of brought that to a quick finish. For want of a better word, he kind of was able to bring himself round, to regulate his emotions, find that inner balance, and then help as well. I often work with parents. We do strategy sessions with parents, and we often kind of plan these things in advance. And actually, one of the biggest challenges a lot of my parents that I work with share, and parents that talk to us in our community share, is that it just goes on for too long. That they refuse to apologize, or they refuse to help, or they refuse. And actually, a lot of the time, that's just their barriers up, because they don't feel safe in that moment, because you're not giving safe vibes. You don't feel safe because you're angry, and all of a sudden you're not their rock, you're not their safe space, because they've made a mistake. You've reacted to it because your nervous system's kicked in, and actually, all jokes aside, that is where we get those really big compound effects when it comes to behavior, and those small tweaks that we can make such a difference, not only for them but for us as parents as well.
Absolutely, that's fascinating. And I think I definitely, as a parent, I am learning all the time, even though my child is 18 now, but I'm still learning new strategies to cope with day-to-day things that we're now, we're not dealing with toddler tantrums anymore. We're not dealing with, adolescence anymore. She's a young adult now, but we've got different challenges, and we are so similar in our behaviours. Definitely. We're both so stubborn, so stubborn. So if we have a moment where we might have a disagreement or crossed words or things like that, we've now come to learn we're very similar in the sense of I know I struggle to verbalize when I'm in that state of frustration, whereas I am happy to write a text message or write something down on a bit of paper. So you generally tend to find in my house, if we've had cross words, we'll take ourselves away and then we'll have a really deep conversation over text message, and then we'll come together and have a talk. But that initial interaction after that has to be done in separate rooms on a text message. I don't know why this is. I mean, you might be able to shed some light on the science behind it. I mean, we're both autistic, so I don't know if that's a communication thing between the two of us that we feel less. I don't know if it's like it's less confronting when you're in that state of overwhelm in a moment. It's less confronting to take yourself away and write something down. And I guess as well, it's that feeling of being able to verbalize everything you feel in that moment without being interrupted. You've got everything out. The other person then gets everything out, and then we come together and we verbally talk. I would say we have a hug, but she's not tactile. I am, so we don't match up on that. But it's funny how your behaviours really impact that kind of communication in that moment, doesn't it?
Gosh, yeah, absolutely. And in that moment, you're not ready to receive information because you need to get your information out.
Yeah,
and it's acknowledging that. And actually, sometimes just sitting next to someone is enough to, and particularly our young people. And as you said, all ages and stages are different because their needs are different at different ages and stages. Their, what they're trying to achieve is different. What they're working on is different. And of course, in terms of neurotypes, it's different as well. And I think actually sometimes if your child is not, there will be moments where I will try and speak to my son about something and he can't. And he's like, he would just, shut it down straight away. And in those cases, I just sounds really strange. I just heavily breathe next to him. Sounds awful. But that whole process of
regulating
my nervous system co-regulates his.
Yes,
So that deep breathing, that just kind of almost kind of theatrical for him signals to him that I'm safe again. And actually sometimes going into separate rooms is I'm going to find my safe space to decompress, and then I can come back, and different children will, respond differently. What we don't want is children doing that because they feel shame. And this, I think, is the difference. There's, the idea that they can go and retreat to a safe space, but also, and this is why I knock in those, I'd never knock the rest of the time. But, he's 5. But when he has gone to his room after having, a moment of dysregulation or a quote unquote tantrum or what have you, I will always knock so that he knows that I'm coming into his safe space. Sometimes he'll be, say, go away, and I'll say, oh, I want to come in. I'm just going to come in, and then I'll leave, or we'll have that conversation. But I think it's really important that we keep that connection. And as children get older, they need to feel heard. So, if they aren't ready, you can say, okay, well, I'm going to sit outside your door. When you're ready, can you open it? Or, I'm going to sit in my room or, in the living room or whatever. And when you're ready, can you come back to me? Because I love you and I want to talk about it. Or writing it down is great, in text or even just on paper. I think, we call it a thought download, or some of the kids I work with call it a brain dump. But, the idea that actually just getting everything out and then decide what do you want to share and what don't you want to share is really important. Sometimes that works really well for some people, grown-ups and children alike, because actually there will be things that they don't want to say, but there will also be things that they still need to get out. And there might be some children that just want to say it all. That's okay. But you just have to be ready to receive it, because sometimes, it doesn't land quite as anticipated. But it's about having that set up in your house. Journaling is fantastic for stuff like this. And if you can get into that practice of when I'm, bringing everything out, this is what it looks like, or it might be you just voice noting and then deleting it. It might be you just typing it all out and then deleting it, whatever it is. But having that out is so important. So important.
I completely agree. And I had this wonderful moment recently, Mother's Day, and my daughter was home, and we spent the afternoon going through her baby box and going through all of her memory box from her childhood. It was the most unprompted activity, but it was the best afternoon because we're both adults and we're so busy with juggling work and study and everything, so we do tend to be a bit like ships in the night sometimes. So having like a whole day for Mother's Day, it was the best present, just having the whole day together with neither of us working, and we stumbled upon her memory boxes, so we were going through them and we found a book that we used to write to each other in when she was 9. Sam, honestly, it was the funniest thing reading back it. We were in hysterics looking back at it because I remember starting this book because she was 9 and I was getting to the point where I was like, I want to make sure she's got an outlet. I want to make sure she's open with me. I want to make sure that there's a kind of a passageway for her to talk to me if she needs to, but I don't want her to feel embarrassed if it's something that's, a bit close to my, if she wants to talk about boys or things like that. So I got this little notebook and I was like, right, we're going to write to each other. If you've got anything you want to say to me, write it in there, put it under my pillow and I'll look at it and I'll reply. And it was hilarious because apart from the odd thing that she did use it for its purpose to talk to me, most of it was, can you make me breakfast in the morning? I would like pancakes with Nutella. And it was like her food order. We were having so much laughter reading it back because I was like, you didn't use this book for what it needed to be used for. But it had its purpose, and there were times where she did use it, but it became so comfortable for her as an outlet that she used it to just write the most random things in. But it was the best moment, and it was that I highly recommend it to any parent. Use Mother's Day to do things like that because it really was an amazing moment to reflect on. But it was so funny.
I love that. I love that. I used to write my mum notes, but looking back in my childhood, I used to do the same. I used to write my mum notes, like apology letters often, and things like that. And actually, for children, it's such a powerful way to do it because so often the power is so different, and I'm actively trying to make that not the case in my house. But there always is that, I'm the grown up and you're the child scenario in some format. And we talk about communication books a lot in terms of school as well. And it used to be, the behaviour book where we write children's names down, but actually having a tracking book and a communication book is great. And I used to have it with parents, as a teacher, where they could let me know. And this was, long before I put the behaviour balance system in place in the way, in its format now. But I guess this was the starting point of it. We used to set up communication books where parents could let me know if they'd slept well or if they had had breakfast, or and it wasn't all children, of course. It was like a few children that were finding things tough, but it was a way to have that open communication, which wasn't, which was blame and shame free. It was that. So I think, doesn't just work for us and our kiddos as parents, but it works with the school, it works with, each other as grown-ups as well, and having that outlet. I've got I know people that write poems as well, to get their thoughts and emotions out and things. Any form of expression is so important. Always better out than in, as they say.
Absolutely, completely agree. So come on, tell us what is the behaviour balance system and the Behaviour Bank? What are they, and where did they come from? How did you decide to develop something like this?
So the Behaviour Balance System, or TBBS, originally started because I had a couple of children in my class who found following instructions and just the environment really tough. I had one little boy, we'll call him Joshua, for this, and he would sit under the table and howl and things, and just wasn't able to access things at all. And we did a lot to support him, and this was at my very early stages of my career. He was in year 4 at the time, and I remember just thinking, I just need to give him some step-by-step things, and I started out with actually teaching a lesson under the table, which was very bizarre. It was a lesson that all the kids then had to sit on the floor for, and they all thought I was bonkers, I'm sure. But it actually stopped the howling and really kind of connected the child to the class, and it was really wonderful. So, and it was actually by mistake, because I just didn't know what else to do in that moment with this child. And I'd not long been teaching. I was like, oh my gosh, how do I reach this kid? And I just thought, right, we're all going to sit on the floor. If you
want to get down,
if you can't bring the hill, can't get to the hill, going to go to the hill, and the hill's going to come to me, and all that jazz. So that's what we did. And actually, from there, I just started to chunk little things with him, and we started to. I created something called the Road to Regulation, and it wasn't called that then. It didn't have a name then, but it was, how do I get you from A to B? Way that is useful and clear, and doesn't mean that I have to kind of sit with you constantly. And it was very simple. It was, we're going to do this, and then you're going to have a break, and then you're going to do this, and then you're going to have a break, and then you're going to do this, and then you're going to have a break. And I printed it off on paper, and I've got to build towers and all sorts of things, and it started off like that. And then we had one on the wall, because we were looking at different challenges in the class, and so we had that, and it was always the road. I've always had a bit of an obsession with journeys, and life being a journey. I actually had a tattoo of that, I think it's, I can't remember what it says, I had it so many years ago. It says like, the steps we take today define the journey we make tomorrow, or something like that. But I've always been very much focused on the fact that everything is part of the journey. And I shared this, not the tattoo, but I shared this mantra with the children, and we kind of had this as an ongoing thing. And I guess that all led to this development, because the idea of shaming behavior was really hard, because we'd use these traffic light systems in schools, or these clouds. And I remember having children cry at the end of the day, and I'd be like, why are you crying? And they say, I'm still on the black cloud, or the thunder cloud, or whatever, or the red the red light. And it was because I'd forgotten to move them, not because they were not behaving. And you're juggling so much as a teacher, and you just forget, and I always thought, gosh, why am I doing why am I trying to get children up on this cloud, or the star, or the rainbow, or whatever it is? My goodness, there's so many versions out there. So I stopped doing it, and I just with one class I did beat the teacher, and that worked really well, because it was a very boy heavy class, and they were very competitive. But then I very quickly realized that actually competing wasn't serving the purpose that I thought. They then were really competitive with each other, and it started to become this horrible environment. I was like, oh gosh. So we stopped that. And and I look back and I think, my goodness, all of those poor children that were part of this journey. If I could just apologize to you all right now, for all of these trials that is teacher life, because you're trying to do the best for the kids, and all with the very best intentions, and it's only what you're trained in. You only know what you know when you know it. And so it's all of the things that I've been told to use, all these policies, and what had been shown in different schools, and it occurred to me suddenly that actually most of my children just wanted a hug. They all just wanted a hug. And I've worked in some areas where children have been through an awful lot, and some areas where you wouldn't think they had, but they have, because life doesn't change where you live. The trauma and the impact just is different. We all go through different experiences, but ultimately we have very similar reactions to certain things. And so I just realized that actually connection was really important, and communication was really important. So I set up what was a worry box at one point, turned into a communication box, because like you were saying, getting children to write it down, draw it out, or just kind of put it, or I had like a picture of what they wanted from that, and they would put their name on the back for the early years. It's like, do you want to talk to me? Do you want to hug? Do you just want to like share something? Or and they would tick the box. And now all of this is available within the Behaviour Bank. And actually it started to really shift behaviour, because all of a sudden children didn't, they had another out. We spoke about this before. They had another option. And this is not to say that behaviour is always therefore perfect afterwards, because ultimately all behaviour is telling us something, and we will never have no reaction to things. I always talk about the fact that so often I hear having calm corners and a calm space and a calm this and a calm that, but actually our children need space for up and down regulation, and in the home as well as in the school setting and nursery setting, because we don't want to constantly be calm. There are lots of emotions that we are meant to experience, and actually we need time to process that emotion, to understand it, to recognize it. And so that's how the behavior balance system came about, was me trying things and getting it wrong over many years, and realizing that actually what we're doing for our children is not useful. It's not useful for them or for us. It's stressful, and stress is one of the biggest challenges to overcome when it comes to behavior. So I started to put all these things in place, and then I was doing I was actually a literacy consultant, as I shared earlier, and I went into a school one day, and one of the head teacher at the school was looking at the data with me, and they just said, why is this so different on paper and versus in the classroom? And I become an executive mentor and coach, and done NLP, which is neuro linguistic programming, looking at the brain. I love the brain, all of the brains, and I had already kind of stepped into that world, and she just said, can you fix it? Because we know the kids can do more. What can we do about this? And I just said, yes, I'm sure I can. I'm sure we can do something about this, because if not, we'll give it a good old go. So we did a trial. I created a children's coaching program focusing on communication and confidence, and we ran this program. It was 12-week program. I'd never run anything like it's other than kind of interventions and from my experience in the classroom and things, and the results were absolutely phenomenal. In fact, some of the kids went over a whole year's academic progress in less than 12 weeks. We had one child skipping through the gates, having previously been writing suicidal notes to herself, which I didn't know. They didn't hear that at the time. And all the staff were like, what have you done with these kids? Because they're so different. And it worked. And I had never seen an impact like that in the classroom before. I'd never merged the two worlds of coaching and education. And even as a deputy head teacher, it's not something that I was really massively focused on. It was, how to get the children, if I'm honest, to comply, because that's what teaching was. How do we get compliance and how do we get results? But actually, it's not about compliance and results. It's about collaboration and connection and creativity. And these are the things that I've learned through this journey. And it was actually the children that were saying things like, Sam, we're learning, because I taught them a lot about the neuroscience behind behaviour and what they were doing and what they were learning and about their brain types. And they were going into the classroom and they were saying things to their teachers like, you're shouting at me because you're dysregulated. Do you want to take a big breath? And their teachers were getting cross, funnily enough. And their parents were getting angry because they were like, who are you talking to? And they were getting asked to leave the classroom, or their plays were taken away, and they were being punished for being rude or disrespectful. And actually, we were kind of giving the skills to our children that our adults didn't have, which was quite a scary concept, actually. So that's how we started to develop it, and why we went in to create the Behaviour Bank. So we then started to deliver teacher training on behaviour, emotional regulation, and inclusive practice. It's all, focusing on the neuroscience behind behaviour, what emotions are, how we can utilise them and not focus on just one. So we do a lot about that. And then we started to run parent workshops, parent strategy sessions. And this was all very well and good, but we couldn't run everything all at once. And we quickly realized that actually, you know, behavior isn't just what we say to our children. You know, we can't support it just through responsive strategies. They're very important, but they're only part of the triangle of the balance system. So we started to look at, okay, what's the preventative? So I always talk about having, you know, being proactive, having preventative strategies. We then want the in the moment stuff, which is our, you know, responsive strategies, and then we will need the, you know, the repair, the restorative strategies as well, as I use at home very, very often. And so we started to create the bank for that, and I've had the absolute honor and privilege to work with some incredible, amazing people in different spaces. So we've got a sleep consultant, we've got a nutritionalist, a dietitian, we've got a reflexologist, we've got a psychotherapist, we've got a matrescence expert. For matrescence, for anyone that's thinking, what is that? It is the science of becoming a parent or a mother. So we've got a whole host of different experts that have contributed to the Behaviour Bank. And the idea of the bank is that, one, as practitioners, we can reach the parents that maybe won't come forwards for help because of whatever reason. And it was one of my biggest frustrations, was wanting to help all my families as a teacher, but not being able to reach the ones that most needed the help, you know. You know, that really kind of bridges that gap, and it provides ongoing CPD or, you know, professional development for staff. So we've got nurseries part of it, schools part of it. We work with councils and local authorities. We work with, you know, secondary schools, primary schools, you name it. We're trying to support anyone working with or living with children in understanding the brain, understanding behaviour and why it's so important to recognise, and to give tools and strategies that we weren't given and trained with. And you know, it, going back to what I said earlier, we only know what we know when we know it, and it's all very well knowing it, but sometimes we don't get the opportunity to apply it. So the idea of the bank is to take people through that process of, these are the skills you can use either ahead of time or in the moment, or, you know, restoratively as part of that repair, and then this is how you implement it. You know, whether it is plug and play, we've got resources on here that you can, on the bank, that you can use in your classroom straight away. We've got a whole emotional literacy program, which is called the Vibration Station. We've also got the home equipment, or vibrations. So we've got that for parents as well, so they can teach their children about emotional literacy and talk about it through a whole host of different mediums. And then we also have our neuroscience for kids, which is all about understanding the brain. And we've got Team TAP, which are our characters, our brain characters, and really the children just get to understand themselves and realize there's nothing wrong with them. You know, they have a big emotion, they have a big behavior. It's not because there's something wrong with them, it's because their brain is braining, is doing what it's meant to do, and your nervous system is reacting in a way it's meant to. And actually, once you start to unpick that with children and parents and teachers and grown-ups alike, you know, the response is so different. You know, I always lean into that whole the phrase, that my favorite phrase is, you poor developing brain. Because it reminds my developed brain that children are just developing, and they're not trying to do it out of spite, they're not irritating me on purpose, you know, or they're not trying to be manipulative, which is one that comes up a lot, or disrespectful or hurtful. They are just struggling, and they are, you know, overwhelmed in a world that is incredibly overwhelming for all of us, not just our little humans. And that's kind of how the behaviour balance system and the bank were created, is through lots of noticing of challenges and experiencing the challenges and trying to find a way out of that tunnel that is actually useful in the long run. You know, there's no denying that rewards and punishments work short term. You know, if you want hard to do what you want in that moment, you know, buy them a pack of Pokemon cards or give them a sticker or a chocolate bar or whatever, you're going to get a response. But in the long run, you know, to actually set our children up for lifelong success, they need to have intrinsic motivation. They need to understand themselves. They need to learn boundaries and set boundaries and have communication and all of these skills that lie behind the behavior. And we have to teach them that. We can't just expect it. And I think, you know, it's a bit like saying to children that get their maths question wrong that they're going to miss a playtime as a result of it if we do that behavior. You know, it's the same thing, and we have to teach those skills. We have to break it down, we have to teach it, we have to experience it with them, and give them the tools they need to process emotion.
Absolutely, I completely agree. And I love that you are approaching it not just for the children or with the children, not just with the school and the teachers, not just with the parents, but actually everyone has a responsibility. Yeah. And it's so important. And that's something that I'm really passionate about as well, is actually we're not just trying to work with and access one person, because everyone has a role and everyone has a responsibility in that kind of stakeholder in a child's life, isn't it? And we all need to be working together. And I mean, I don't know if it's part of teacher training, or but the knowledge of the brain and behavior and how that works, I don't know, is that even something that you're taught as a teacher?
It wasn't when I was trained, and lots of the ECTs that I work with are saying it's still. I am trying to work with more universities and teacher training companies to support, you know, the work they do, not to kind of throw baby and bathwater out, because, you know, the teacher training stuff's great, but we do, I think, in my very humble opinion, need to focus more on this, because actually dysregulated children can't learn. You know, they can't access the learning, or if they can, they can't sustain it. And actually we create a very stressful environment without realizing it a lot of the time. And it doesn't need to be all, you know, calming music and lights off all of the time. It needs to be ebb and flow, and it needs to, you know, we need to teach teachers how the brain works, how the nervous system responds, how to up and down regulate children and themselves. A lot of the teacher training that we do, in fact everything that we do, starts with the grown-up and then leads into the children. We always look at our nervous systems first and provide support for that, because to regulate a whole class of 30 odd children, you need to be able to manage your own nervous system, because you're human and you give things out without realizing it. And the same with parents. You know, actually a lot of the work we do when we work with parents directly or via the bank starts with the parent. We have a whole U-Vault in the bank. We've got everything from guided meditation in there to nutrition to mind management. We've got a yoga instructor in there. Everything that is about you as a parent or a practitioner. We've got the same in both sides, because the sides are separate. So if you're a parent, you get the parent side. If you're a practitioner, you get the practitioner side. Schools and nurseries, or any organisation, gets access to both. So when a school or a nursery get a subscription, all their families get access, and all of their staff at the same time.
Okay.
A holistic approach. But the idea is that we start with the grown-ups and we filter it out for the children, because ultimately that's the most important place to start, because so much of our learning as children is through what we see, not what we're told.
Yes. Yeah, so true. So on that note then, what key information would you say is really important for teachers and parents to know about behaviour? I don't know if that's going to be the same thing for teachers and parents, or whether it's slightly different, but what would you say was a key bit of information regarding behaviour that should be known?
Yeah, I think, you know, stuff that relates to both elements, and key information for both sides, parents and practitioners, is that a lot of behaviour is that compounding of things, and I think sometimes I hear a lot from both practitioners and parents, you know, it came out of nowhere, or they responded like for no reason. And I think something that I would literally have stamped on my forehead if I could is everything has a reason. You know, behavior, there is always a reason. It might not be your reason, but it's theirs. And actually, I think that our children will show us if we don't pick up the signals get louder. I actually just responded on LinkedIn to a message or a post about someone who has been bitten at work today, and you know how about unacceptable behavior. That wasn't the phrasing that they used, but it was a bit of a theme that came through some of the comments. And my initial reaction there is actually, I hope that child's okay. I hope you as an adult are okay, but I hope that child is okay. But to get to that point, there must have been a lot of missed support. And actually, what we do to set our children up for success is most important when it comes to behavior, not what we do to stop the behavior. And I think that's the focus shift that I am just trying to work on with everyone. It's not how do we stop this behavior, it's how do we meet the needs behind it. Because there is always a need behind the behavior. There's lots of variations, and these are not things I've created. Things like the window of tolerance. I think that's Dan Siegel's work, and the idea of the iceberg. I can't remember who that is. I've read thousands of books. But all of these things are really great visual representations, because ultimately the behavior is just the top bit. It is just what we see, and behavior is, for us, information and communication about what they are experiencing in their internal world. And when we start to unpick their internal world with them, we do see a massive impact on behavior. And actually, sometimes it's not about tackling it, head on. It's about all the stuff we do around it, that makes the biggest difference and the most long-term impact.
Absolutely. It's so important. And I think there is a real need for education around understanding behavior, for education around neuroscience and how our brains work and things like that, because actually, and even the fact that you mentioned that you have things like a nutritionist as part of it, because food actually impacts our behavior as well, doesn't it? But it's not something that you naturally know. It doesn't sound like food would impact your behavior. I mean, apart from when people say they're hungry or something like that, but
that's actually a thing.
It has an actual impact on it, doesn't it? And I think it's so important for us to learn about this. And I'm really interested in neuroscience, and so this is something that I actively read about and find opportunities to learn about. But not everybody has that inclination to do that. But when you're working with children, or if you're a parent and you choose to have children, it's something that would be really beneficial to know. So it sounds like your system and the resources and the support that you're providing are invaluable for anybody who has involvement in working or living with a young person. How can people work with you? What are the options to get involved with the work that you do?
So we do a wide range of things. Of course, we've got the Behaviour Bank, which basically takes neuroscience and makes it, easy to understand and apply, so that people don't have to do lots of reading. But so we've got the Behaviour Bank, and you can search us, the Behaviour Bank, it will come up, or you can go on our website, which is SPD Training and Consultancy, or I think you can still search it through SPD Tuition and Coaching as well. But yeah, you can find that online. We've got a lot of free support as well. We run regular free webinars for parents and for educators as well. I think we're up to 2 a month now, one for each. And that is with the experts that join the bank and other experts that I work with who want to give some fabulous support, which is great. And you can find that through our website as well, or on our mailing list. I always send out everything on the mailing list. We also have our strategy sessions, so we work directly with parents and families. Of course, that's very limited because I only have a certain number of hours in a day, but you can work with us and do strategy sessions, and those sessions are about unpicking the challenges you are facing as a family and working towards that with you. It's like having a Sam in your pocket. And then we have our workshops and webinars, and of course run our teacher training sessions. We do whole school, we do leadership support, we do Senko training. We are working more and more with local authorities. So if you are looking for some training for your borough, then please do get in touch. Because ultimately we are trying to work with as many people as we possibly can to shift how behaviour is seen and supported. But we also run confidence and communications coaching for kids still. So we do that in school, and we also do that through families as well, directly. And the idea there really is that we help children understand themselves, so that they can access the world around them. And it's such a different world. I talk to the teenagers that I work with and the young people that I work with, and the challenges they face I never faced. I've got a toolkit that they can use in any scenario. It's all completely transferable, but the things they share, a lot of the things they share in today's world, we didn't have as teenagers. The fortunate life that we actually had of no social media, for example, or just the not having our external world follow us home, is something that I will forever be grateful for, actually, because it's really tough. And I think with fear of behaviour, in particularly the secondary sector, comes a huge need for control, and some of the teenagers that I talk to suffer really with anxiety and a whole host of other things that come from not having enough control for themselves and not feeling in control, and just feeling massively overwhelmed. So we still run those sessions, and I'm very passionate about keeping those going. We offer group sessions, but we also offer one-to-one sessions, for our young people, and we've just started to work with someone who works directly around eating disorders and things like that, again going back to nutrition and sleep. It's everything we do is holistic, and it's because we are complex beings. We're not so simple as it to be one thing.
Absolutely. It sounds like there are so many different ways that people can get involved in working with you, which is fantastic. What I'll do is I'll pop some links underneath the episode so that people can just come straight through to contact you or a member of your team, so that you can see how they can best access the amazing support and resources that you have. Just to close off, really, because Recap's all about embracing everyone, making everyone feel at home and building this supportive community, I ask all guests to have a think of one piece of advice or an empowering message to give to our listeners, to share the love and support. So if you could say just one thing that could help even just one person, what is it that you'd like to say?
It's never just you.
Very
You're never
true.
alone, and I think sometimes when the world feels like it's crashing around us, our natural instinct is to kind of just hide away or retreat, or not tell anyone, not mention it, try and deal with it yourself, and actually that kind of inner critic comes out so heavily, doesn't it, in those moments. And I just think whether you're a parent or a practitioner or a young person, knowing that you're not special. You are simply human. It's not about you, is a really empowering message, if taken in the manner it's meant, because actually we are all just trying to do the best we can with what we've got. And I love that saying, and I think it's such a powerful one, because as I said before, it's all part of the journey. And it's not about getting to the destination, is it? It's so cheesy. I am such a cheese. I really am, but I promise you all, I really genuinely mean this stuff. I do. I really do mean it. I think, it's, we focus so heavily on where we want our children to be and what we want them to do and where we want to be in life and the success we want to have, that sometimes we miss those mini moments of that. So knowing that there's, it's not us getting it wrong. It's not us being, not worthy or not enough or not knowing enough or, doing the wrong things. It's actually just us on our own journey. I hope that's helpful to anyone listening, and certainly something I remind myself of when my inner critic kicks in, because we've all got that friendly little face inside that pops up at the very worst time.
Absolutely. No, Sam, that's beautiful. Thank you so much for coming and talking to us today and sharing the amazing work you're doing. I can't wait to see where it all goes next. And I'll definitely be an avid follower, and anything that I can do to support and help, you just have to shout, because I think the work you do is incredible. And I love that it is all backed by research, science backed and tried and tested, and really creates that holistic approach with everyone involved in the child's life. So best of luck with everything going forward. It's incredible what you're doing. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Lucy. It's lovely to chat with you.
Good to see you.